In a faraway galaxy, there was an empire ruled by a powerful emperor named Kang Su. His palace was vast and filled with wonders, but nothing compared to the most prized treasures of his reign, his baby dragons. These were no ordinary creatures. They were small yet fierce, glowing faintly with energy that could light up entire cities. However, these dragons also caused chaos wherever they went. Their wild energy made them impossible to control, and many had tried and failed to manage them. The emperor's advisors were at their wits' end. They had called upon scientists, dragon trainers, and even mystics from distant planets, but none could tame the beasts. The dragons would destroy furniture, melt walls, and sometimes even fly out of their enclosures, causing panic across the palace grounds. It seemed hopeless until someone suggested bringing in a human nurse named Yunji. She wasn't famous or well-known, but she had a reputation for solving problems others thought unsolvable. When Yunji arrived at the palace, she was greeted with skeptical looks. The court members whispered among themselves, questioning how a mere human could succeed where so many experts had failed. But Yunji paid no attention to their doubts. She carried herself with quiet confidence as she walked into the chamber where the dragons were kept. The room was enormous, filled with shattered objects and scorched marks on the walls. The air crackled with energy, and the dragons flitted about restlessly, their glowing bodies moving too fast for the eye to follow. Yunji stood still, watching the dragons carefully. Unlike others who had come before her, she didn't shout or wave tools around to catch their attention. Instead, she simply observed. After hours of standing silently, she noticed something peculiar. Whenever the dragons moved close to certain objects, they slowed down slightly. It was almost imperceptible, but Yunji's sharp eyes caught it. Intrigued, she began testing different items, noting which ones seemed to calm the dragons just a little. She soon realized that the dragons reacted not to the objects themselves, but to the sounds they emitted. A broken piece of crystal vibrated when touched, producing a soft hum that seemed to soothe the creatures. Another object, a metallic shard, clicked faintly, drawing the dragons closer. This discovery sparked an idea in Yunji's mind. What if the key to managing the dragons lay not in force or traditional methods, but in understanding their connection to sound? Yunji spent days gathering materials and building simple devices that could produce various frequencies. She worked tirelessly, often staying late into the night. Her hands were calloused from handling tools, and her face bore signs of exhaustion. But she never gave up. Slowly, she began introducing her creations to the dragons. At first, there was no noticeable change. The dragons continued their chaotic behavior, paying little heed to her efforts. But Yunji remained patient, tweaking her devices and observing every reaction. One day, something extraordinary happened. As Yunji activated one of her gadgets, emitting a low, steady tone, the dragons paused. Their glowing forms dimmed slightly, and they hovered in place, seemingly entranced. For the first time since her arrival, the room grew quiet. Even the court members who had been watching her work with skepticism couldn't hide their surprise. Though the effect lasted only a few moments, it was enough to prove that Yunji was onto something. Word of her progress spread quickly through the palace, reaching the ears of Jae-min, a high-ranking advisor who had always been critical of outsiders. Jae-min disliked the idea of a human succeeding where imperial experts had failed. He saw Yunji's methods as unorthodox and unnecessary, and he decided to make things difficult for her. Despite this looming threat, Yunji pressed on, determined to unlock the secrets of the dragon's behavior. Little did she know, her journey was only beginning, and greater challenges awaited her ahead. As days passed, Yunji continued her experiments with sound waves and the baby dragons. Her small victories gave her hope, but she knew she was far from solving the problem completely. The dragons were calmer during certain tones, but their behavior remained unpredictable. Sometimes they would respond beautifully, almost docile, while other times they would suddenly flare up, sending bursts of energy that shattered nearby objects. It was clear to Yoonji that sound alone wasn't enough. There had to be more to it, something deeper, that she hadn't yet uncovered. Meanwhile, Jae-min, the emperor's advisor, grew increasingly frustrated. He couldn't stand seeing a human gaining attention in the imperial court, especially one who used such unconventional methods. Jae-min believed that tradition and authority were the only ways to solve problems, and he saw Yoon-ji's approach as childish and foolish. Determined to undermine her progress, he began spreading rumors about her work. He told anyone who would listen that her devices were dangerous and might harm the dragons in the long run. Some members of the court started to doubt her, whispering behind her back and questioning whether she truly deserved the emperor's trust. Yoonji tried to ignore the growing tension around her. She focused on her work, spending hours testing new frequencies and observing the dragon's reactions. One evening, as she sat alone in the dragon chamber, she noticed something peculiar. One of the dragons, smaller than the others and glowing faintly blue, seemed to linger near her whenever she played a specific tone. At first, she thought it was just coincidence, but over time, the pattern became undeniable. This dragon, whom she affectionately named Rin, appeared drawn to her presence. Rin would flutter close, his glowing body dimming slightly as if trying to communicate. Intrigued by this development, Yoonji decided to focus her efforts on Rin. She spent more time interacting with him, speaking softly and letting him explore her tools. Slowly, Rin began to show signs of trust. He no longer flared up when she approached, and he even allowed her to touch his scaly head gently. To Yoonji, this felt like a breakthrough. If she could build a bond with one dragon, perhaps she could do the same with the others. However, Jae-min wasn't about to let her succeed without a fight. Seeing how much attention Rin's progress was getting, he devised a plan to sabotage her work. Late one night, while Yoonji was resting, Jae-min sneaked into the dragon chamber. He tampered with her sound devices, adjusting the frequencies to levels that were harsh and jarring. When Yoonji returned the next morning, she found the dragons agitated and restless. They darted around the room, their glowing forms flickering wildly. Even Rin seemed upset, avoiding her entirely. At first, Yoonji was confused. She checked her devices, thinking she might have made a mistake, but everything appeared to be in order. It wasn't until later that day, while reviewing her recordings, that she noticed the altered frequencies. Someone had deliberately sabotaged her work. Though she didn't have proof, she suspected Jae-min immediately. She confronted him calmly, asking if he had touched her equipment. Jae-min denied it with a smug smile, claiming he had only been inspecting her tools out of concern for the dragon's safety. Despite the setback, Yoonji refused to give up. She repaired her devices and resumed her experiments, this time keeping a closer eye on them. She also doubled down on building trust with Rin, knowing that their bond was key to making progress. Over time, Rin began responding positively again, his glowing form steady and calm whenever she was near. Other dragons started showing interest too, though they were still wary. The court members watched with mixed feelings. Some admired Yoonji's persistence, while others sided with Jae-min, believing her methods were too risky. Tensions ran high, and Yoonji knew she was running out of time. The emperor expected results soon, and if she failed to deliver, Jae-min would surely use it as an excuse to have her removed. Determined not to let that happen, Yoonji pushed herself harder than ever. She stayed up late into the night, refining her techniques and brainstorming new ideas. What if sound wasn't the only factor? What if the dragons craved something else, something emotional? These thoughts swirled in her mind as she worked tirelessly, hoping to uncover the final piece of the puzzle. Little did she know, her instincts were leading her exactly where she needed to go. Yoonji's mind raced as she considered the idea that the dragons might need more than just sound. She had spent so much time focusing on frequencies and gadgets that she hadn't fully explored the emotional side of things. The bond she was building with Rin gave her hope, but she wondered if it could be expanded to include all the dragons. What if they weren't just wild creatures driven by energy? What if they were lonely, craving connection and care, like any other living being? To test her theory, Yoonji began spending even more time in the dragon chamber. She brought simple toys and objects that made soft noises or had smooth textures, hoping to engage the dragon's curiosity. At first, the dragons ignored her efforts, continuing their chaotic behavior. But slowly, one by one, they started to approach. They sniffed the toys cautiously, nudging them with their noses or batting them around with their tails. It was a small change, but it was enough to encourage Yoonji to keep going. Rin remained her closest companion. He followed her everywhere within the chamber, his glowing form dimming whenever he was near her. Yoonji noticed that he seemed happiest when she spoke to him softly, using a gentle tone. She began talking to him more often, sharing stories about her life and humming tunes she remembered from her childhood. Though she didn't know if he understood her words, she felt a connection growing between them. One day, while playing with Rin, Yoonji decided to try something new. She held out her hand, palm up, and waited patiently. For a moment, Rin hesitated, his glowing eyes fixed on her face. Then, slowly, he lowered his head and pressed it against her palm. The touch sent a shiver through Yoonji. Not because it was cold, but because it felt so meaningful. It was as though Rin was saying, "I trust you." Encouraged by this breakthrough, Yoonji introduced interactive tools designed to mimic parental bonds. She created devices that emitted soft vibrations and warm light, simulating the feeling of being close to another creature. These tools were simple, made from materials she found around the palace, but they worked wonders. The dragons began gravitating toward them, curling up near the devices as if seeking comfort. Over time, their behavior improved significantly. They no longer destroyed everything in sight, and their glowing forms became steadier, less erratic. Jaemin, however, wasn't pleased. He saw the dragon's progress as a threat to his authority. If Yoonji succeeded, it would prove that his traditional methods were outdated and ineffective. Determined to stop her, he went to the emperor and claimed that her experiments were putting the dragons at risk. He argued that her untested gadgets might harm their health and urged the emperor to remove her immediately. The emperor listened carefully, his expression unreadable. He valued tradition but also recognized the importance of innovation. After hearing Jaemin's concerns, he called for Yoonji to present her findings. Nervous but determined, Yoonji stood before the emperor and explained her methods. She showed him videos of the dragons interacting with her tools and described how their behavior had improved. She even brought Rin into the room, demonstrating the bond they shared. The emperor watched silently, his gaze thoughtful. When Yoonji finished speaking, Jaemin stepped forward, ready to argue against her once again. But before he could say a word, something unexpected happened. Rin, who had been quietly observing from the corner, suddenly flew to Yoonji's side. He hovered protectively, his glowing form brightening, as if to defend her. The court members gasped in awe, and even Jaemin looked stunned. The emperor nodded slowly, clearly impressed. He dismissed Jaemin's claims and ordered Yoonji to continue her work. Relieved but aware of the pressure mounting, Yoonji returned to the dragon chamber with renewed determination. She knew she was close to solving the problem, but there was still much to do. The dragons were calmer now, but they needed more than gadgets and games. They needed genuine care and attention. As she sat among the dragons, watching them play and rest, Yoonji realized that her journey was about more than just managing chaos. It was about understanding these creatures, forming connections, and proving that even the wildest hearts could find peace with the right kind of love. She smiled softly, knowing she was on the right path. With the emperor's approval, Yoonji threw herself into her work with renewed energy. She knew she had made progress, but there was still a long way to go. before the dragons could be considered truly manageable. Her bond with Rin had grown stronger, and other dragons were beginning to show signs of trust, but they still acted unpredictably at times. Yunji realized that while sound and interactive tools helped calm them, what they truly needed was a deeper sense of connection, something closer to family. To achieve this, Yunji decided to involve more humans in her efforts. She trained a small team of palace staff, teaching them how to interact with the dragons using patience and care. At first, the staff members were hesitant, fearing the creature's wild energy. But Yunji reassured them, explaining that the dragons responded best to kindness and consistency. Slowly, the team grew comfortable, learning to speak softly, offer toys, and even mimic some of the calming tones Yunji used. The results were remarkable. With more people engaging the dragons, their behavior improved even further. They no longer flew around aimlessly or destroyed everything in sight. Instead, they began forming bonds with individual team members, much like Rin had done with Yunji. One dragon took a liking to a young assistant named Hyun, who always carried a small flute. Another bonded with an older caretaker named Unsuk, who hummed old folk songs as she worked. The chamber, once filled with chaos, now felt almost peaceful. Despite these successes, Jaemin refused to give up. He saw the growing harmony in the dragon chamber as a threat to his position and became desperate to sabotage Yunji's work. Late one night, he sneaked into the chamber again, this time targeting the interactive tools. He damaged several devices, altering their vibrations and lights to make them harsh and unsettling. When Yunji arrived the next morning, she found the dragons agitated once more. They flitted about anxiously, their glowing forms flickering wildly. Yunji immediately suspected Jaemin, but she had no proof. Determined not to let him undo her hard work, she rallied her team to repair the damaged tools. Together, they worked tirelessly, fixing each device and calming the dragons as quickly as possible. It was during this process that Yunji noticed something unusual. Even though the tools had been tampered with, the dragons didn't completely lose control. Their bonds with the humans seemed to anchor them, keeping their energy steady despite the disruption. This discovery gave Yunji an idea. If the dragon's connection to humans was strong enough to counteract sabotage, then perhaps it was time to focus less on gadgets and more on strengthening those relationships. She encouraged her team to spend even more time with the dragons, playing games, offering treats, and simply sitting quietly with them. Over time, the dragons became calmer and more affectionate, seeking out their human companions whenever they felt uneasy. Jaemin watched all of this from afar, growing increasingly frustrated. He couldn't understand why Yunji's unconventional methods continued to succeed. In a final attempt to discredit her, he approached the emperor and demanded a public demonstration of her progress. He claimed that if the dragons could not be controlled under strict conditions, Yunji's methods would prove useless. The emperor agreed, setting a date for the test. On the day of the demonstration, the entire court gathered in the dragon chamber. The dragons were placed in the center of the room, surrounded by skeptical advisors and nervous palace staff. Jaemin stood nearby, smirking confidently, certain that Yunji would fail. But Yunji remained calm. She trusted the bonds she and her team had built with the dragons. When the test began, the dragons initially seemed restless, their glowing forms flickering nervously. But as Yunji and her team stepped forward, speaking softly and offering reassurance, the dragons settled down. They moved toward their human companions, their energy steady and calm. Even Rin, who had always been the most responsive, stayed close to Yunji, his glowing form dimming slightly as if to show his trust. The court members watched in stunned silence. Jaemin's smirk faded as the dragons demonstrated unprecedented obedience. The emperor nodded approvingly, clearly satisfied with the outcome. When the test ended, he turned to Jaemin and reprimanded him for his constant interference. Humiliated, Jaemin retreated from the chamber, his plans in ruins. Yunji felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had proven that her methods worked not through force or tradition, but through understanding and compassion. As she looked around the chamber, watching the dragons interact peacefully with her team, she knew she had achieved something extraordinary. The success of the demonstration marked a turning point in the palace. The emperor declared Yunji's methods official protocol for managing the baby dragons, and her team was given full responsibility for their care. The once chaotic dragon chamber transformed into a place of harmony, where glowing forms moved gracefully and humans worked alongside the creatures with ease. The court members who had doubted Yunji now praised her brilliance, and even those who had supported Jae-min quietly admitted she had done the impossible. For Yunji, the victory was bittersweet. She felt proud of what she and her team had accomplished, but she also knew that their journey wasn't just about taming dragons. It was about proving that kindness and understanding could overcome even the most difficult challenges. As she walked through the chamber each day, she marveled at how far the dragons had come. They were no longer wild, destructive creatures. They had become companions, almost like family. Rin remained her closest friend. He followed her everywhere, his glowing form dimming whenever he was near her. Sometimes, when the palace grew quiet, Yunji would sit on the floor, and Rin would curl up beside her, his warm energy filling the room. She often found herself talking to him, sharing her thoughts and dreams as if he were an old confidant. Though she didn't know if he understood her words, she felt certain he understood her heart. Jae-min, meanwhile, faded into the background. After his public humiliation, he lost much of his influence in the court. Some say he left the palace altogether, unable to bear the shame of being outsmarted by a human nurse. Others whispered that he spent his days plotting revenge, though no one took him seriously anymore. Whatever the truth, his presence was no longer a threat to Yunji or her work. As the weeks passed, the dragons continued to thrive under Yunji's care. Their behavior became so predictable that the palace staff began assigning them small tasks, like carrying messages or patrolling the grounds. The dragons seemed to enjoy these responsibilities, taking pride in their roles as guardians of the empire. Even the emperor himself expressed gratitude, acknowledging that Yunji's efforts had not only solved a major problem, but also strengthened the bond between humans and dragons. One evening, as the sun set over the palace, Yunji stood on a balcony overlooking the grounds. Below her, the dragons soared through the skies, their glowing forms lighting up the horizon like stars. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing she had made a difference, not just for the empire, but for the dragons themselves. They had been misunderstood and feared, but now they were valued and loved. Her thoughts turned to her own future. She had always dreamed of returning home someday, but now she wondered if this palace, with its glowing dragons and newfound harmony, had become her true home. She smiled softly, realizing that it didn't matter where she belonged. What mattered was the impact she had made. In the distance, Rin flew toward her, his glowing form steady and calm. He landed gently on the balcony railing, his eyes meeting hers. Yunji reached out, placing a hand on his scaly head. "Thank you," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was thanking him or the universe for bringing them together. As the night fell, the dragons continued their watch over the palace, their glowing forms casting a soft light across the grounds. To the people of the empire, they were no longer symbols of chaos. They were protectors, guardians of peace. And to Yunji, they were proof that even the wildest hearts could find love and trust when given the chance. With a final glance at Rin, Yunji turned and walked back inside, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Her journey had been long and difficult, but it had taught her something invaluable: that compassion and perseverance could change the world one dragon at a time.